They thought he would stay silent, that in front of cameras, under pressure, with the whole world watching, he'd fold. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't blink. He stood firm, stared into the lens, and said what no African leader had ever dared to say to a former American president. But before we continue, make sure you subscribe to this channel, a channel that stands with Ibrahim Traoré and the rise of a new Africa. What happened next didn't just shake the room, it shook the balance of global power. And if you think this is just politics, think again. This was personal, this was history. This was a moment no one could unsee. Because Traoré didn't just reject a deal, he rewrote the future. The air inside the conference hall was thick with tension. Reporters shifted in their seats, officials whispered behind folders, and camera crews locked their lenses on the stage. Everyone was waiting for the handshake, the symbolic gesture that would mark a new beginning between Africa and the West. At the center of it all stood Ibrahim Traoré, calm, composed, his eyes scanning the room like a soldier on the battlefield. Barack Obama, invited as a global envoy for diplomacy, had just delivered a well-crafted speech. His words painted visions of unity, investment, and collaboration. But beneath the polished promises, there was something else. A carefully wrapped proposal that came with invisible strings. A deal meant to look like help but feel like control. And Traoré saw it for exactly what it was. The deal promised millions in development aid, new military training programs, and strategic cooperation between Africa and Western partners. It sounded generous. It sounded diplomatic. But to Traoré, it sounded like a leash, one that would slowly tighten around Burkina Faso's sovereignty, disguised as partnership. He had read between the lines, and he wasn't impressed. As applause died down, a well-dressed aide approached Traoré with a tablet. On the screen, the official document. All it needed was his signature. The cameras zoomed in. Microphones picked up the faint sound of rustling paper. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for. But something unexpected happened. Traoré didn't move. He looked at the document for a full 10 seconds, not blinking. Then, slowly, he placed the tablet back on the table. He reached for the microphone instead. The room went dead silent. Even Obama leaned forward slightly, sensing that something was about to break the script. And in that moment, the world held its breath. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. But his words hit harder than any headline. He thanked Obama for the proposal, then said he would have to decline. Not because Burkina Faso didn't need allies, but because his people would no longer trade their dignity for deals made behind closed doors. Africa will rise, he said, but on its own feet. Gasps filled the hall. The Western envoys looked stunned. Even the interpreters hesitated before repeating his words. It wasn't just a rejection, it was a declaration. A line drawn boldly in front of every global power that had ever tried to own a piece of Africa's future. And Traoré had just made history live on air. As the cameras continued rolling, Ibrahim Traoré stepped away from the podium, his silence louder than applause. He was not trying to provoke, he was not seeking confrontation, but his rejection had exposed something far deeper. The hidden expectations the world had placed on African leaders for decades. Expectations to obey, to comply, to be grateful for whatever was handed to them. That day, Traoré shattered that mold. Backstage, whispers turned into frantic phone calls. Journalists raced to rewrite their headlines. Advisors from multiple countries scrambled to spin the moment into something less damaging. But the truth was already echoing across the globe. Traoré had not just said no, he had reminded the world that Africa no longer needed permission to think for itself. And millions watching at home understood the message. Social media platforms lit up within minutes. Clips of the rejection were posted, translated and shared in nearly every language. In Ouagadougou, spontaneous cheers erupted in cafes and university halls. Young men and women saw something in Traoré's stance that they had been waiting for their entire lives. A leader who did not bow, who did not flinch, who made no excuses for putting his people first. Across the Atlantic, responses were divided. Some commentators praised Traoré's courage, calling it a defining moment for African independence. Others accused him of arrogance, of turning down an opportunity